Welcome to the latest Watercolors Aquarium Gallery video brought to you from the Aquarium Studios in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today we're going to be talking about kind of a complex subject because there's so much going on here. It's a whole group of organisms that have specialized care.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to make this video as comprehensive as possible when I was doing research for it, and I realized these animals are so different from everything else we keep that I couldn't do that.
It may come across a little like a species profile, but here we're talking about, what, a family? What are we talking about?
Mostly a genus.
Yeah.
There are a couple of, we're talking about giant clams. Specifically the photosynthetic clams that come from two different genera. The two genera are Hippopus and Tridacna.
Yep.
Hippopus we see occasionally, we've had a little bit of experiments with, but Tridacna really we
That's our bread and butter clam here.
These are members of the same group of organisms that include the infamous giant clam. That's Tridacna gigas. 4 or 5 feet across.
700 pounds and
true monsters.
Mm-hmm.
So the clams have a reputation of being really difficult to care for, and maybe I'm a little biased because I got introduced to clams pretty late in the hobby here. That has not been my experience, and I think the distinction there is whether you're working with wild clams or aquacultured ones. And so I've only ever worked with aquacultured ones, so I haven't had too much difficulty with them.
Sure.
You're not dealing with parasites, and they're a lot less stressed, and they're more used to being handled.
Mm-hmm.
They do get desensitized to that. They don't have they're not like trained or anything, because I'm not sure they have that capability, but
I think sensitized is I think that's the appropriate word to use there.
Yeah. And so just to put in perspective how long we've been doing this, and this is the part where I need my notes. So in the late 70s, the NOAA provided funding for the Micronesian Mariculture Demonstration Center. And the idea was that the certain regions in the Pacific Islands should find ways to be self-sufficient. And so if you're wondering why the United States get involved in the South Pacific, let's just say post-World War II, we signed this thing called the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. And I would have to say that this has been pretty successful because in 1995, the Micronesian Mariculture Demonstration Center got renamed to the Palau Mariculture Demonstration Center, because in 1994, we signed the Compact of Free Association, which was Palau gaining full sovereignty, and they still freely associate with the United States. And that's only relevant because that's where a lot of aquaculture clams started off.
Right. Right.
They closed the life cycle in them in the 80s. By the time we get to 1989, they're in their 3rd generation of Jurassic clams.
That's pretty amazing.
And so having that many generations in the care of man means that there's a legitimate argument that we are reaching the point where we might be able to claim that we've domesticated Jurassic clams.
Ooh, I like that term. That's interesting. Keep in mind a few things about the facilities where they are culturing clams in Palau.
Yep.
Natural sunlight and ocean water.
Yep.
Those two things right there make their systems a little easier than the systems that we have here.
A little bit.
Why is that important? When we're talking about clams in the genus Tridacna, we are talking about clams that are photosynthetic in the same way corals are photosynthetic.
It's actually really cool, and this is what actually got me into Tridacna clams, because corals, they have their symbiotic zooxanthellae living in their individual cells. Tridacna clams don't have that. They have a secondary, it's called the zooxanthellae tubular system, and it's almost like a blood vessel system that's independent from their blood vessel system that's transporting these zooxanthellae up to the skin where they can photosynthesize, and then pumping them back to the stomach where they drop off some of the stuff, and then pumps them back out to the skin. And that's
so cool.
That's ridiculous. That's so crazy.
That's also why when you see the mantle of a Tridacna clam, why there's this amazing complex pattern going on in that. That's the vascular system.
That's so amazing too, because for an organism that on the surface seems so simple, there's so much cool, complex stuff going on under the surface, which is fascinating to learn about.
Right.
What's really crazy to me about these like photosynthetic aspects of this is like on a like biological level, it makes them much more complex than like a filter feeding like mussel, but it actually makes them easier to take care of.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the same way with corals. Amy has experience with some of the non-photosynthetic corals.
Yeah.
They're tricky.
Yeah, it feels a lot like beating your head against the wall sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you can just like flip on a switch to feed your organisms and just have some light for them, that takes away a lot of stress.
The non-photosynthetic clams are not something you'll see at watercolors unless something changes. But currently, if it's a non-photosynthetic clam, i.e. the flame scallop, okay, technically not a clam, but non-photosynthetic mollusk, we're going to go back with that, bivalve, flame scallops, you're not going to see here. They are just too hard to take care of in captivity.
Yeah.
So do you have a, like, if someone asks you what kind of lighting system for a clam, what's going to be your response there?
Good ones.
Good ones.
Clams are photosynthetic. The different species are found at different depths and in different turbidity of waters, and that does affect their needs a little bit. But really, you need the same kind of lighting for a clam that you do for live coral.
Okay.
Does it need the same light that a hammer needs, or does it need the same light that an acro needs? Somewhere.
Yes.
You know.
I think maybe the way to break that down is we often talk about corals as a low light coral or a medium light coral or a high light coral. I wouldn't say you could call any of the clams low light clams.
Right.
You could definitely call some of them medium light clams, with most of them being high light clams.
Okay.
The Duraces are the ones that I consider the easiest. Easy being back in the day that have everything to do with the amount of light you could pump into the tank and how effective they were by nutrients.
Also, fun fact, one of the deeper water species, so.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
And actually, that might be one of the factors that impacts what type of lighting you need in an aquarium, because a lot of the times you're putting the clam on the bottom in the sand.
Right.
So you need the intense lights, not only for the clam, but to get all the way down to it.
But just because they're photosynthetic doesn't mean they can't obtain nutrition via other means. And this is another aspect of them that I find very fascinating. So they still filter feed, and in the aquarium, I highly recommend Seacom's reef phytoplankton. That's actually what I'm feeding the clams here. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that a clam filter feeds. This is the part that actually surprised me when I was doing a lot of research on clams. They don't just filter feed, they can absorb nutrients from the water.
Oh, yes.
So they will pull out things like nitrates, phosphates, and so me and a couple other people in the area have started having discussions of, can you use a clam as like a secondary filtration system? Not as like a substitute for something, but can it, like, could you have a clam instead of like a refugium with potato in it?
My suspicion would be yes.
Yeah, like theoretically it makes sense, but no one's trying it. And I really would like to see someone do that, and like what would happen.
So is the mechanism behind that the vascular system for the zooxanthellae algae?
So they have a very thin skin.
Yeah.
And so I have to imagine at some level they are absorbing something somehow that way into the
That would allow
zooxanthellae
the
system.
algae to absorb them.
But I do know that the clam itself will actually pull nutrients out of the water and then give it to the zooxanthellae and be like, hey, can you do something with this?
That's very cool.
So another product that we've been experimenting with here is actually aquavitro fuel, because it's a carbohydrate, vitamin, fatty acid supplement that we've had pretty good results with things like anemones and certain types of corals. And given that a clam can absorb some of that stuff out of the water, I shouldn't say some of, a lot of that stuff, I can't imagine it won't hurt them.
It's hard whenever we're dosing something we can't really test for specifically. We just assume it's good for everything else, and the logic lines up.
It does. Other water parameters include a lot of those same water parameters we associate with stony corals.
Yep.
So calcium, pH, magnesium, alkalinity, all four of those things have to be in check. They're a little less forgiving than a coral. And it's really simply because when we're talking about a coral, we're talking about a colonial organism. In other words, if something on that coral starts to not look right, probably that's a couple of the polyps actually dying, right? Oh no, something's not looking right, let's turn it around. A clam is a singular organism. If something's not looking right on that clam, it's the whole organism that's in trouble.
Yeah, and there are actually some really cool tells. So like certain clams during certain stages of development are actually growing fast enough that you can actually on the edge of their shell see a white seam.
Yes.
And that's because the edge of the clam is growing so fast that algae hasn't had time to like get on it.
Right,
Just
like the coral.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. So if you were going to list like water parameters that you're testing for, what levels would you want them to be at?
So the standard premium stony coral levels. So calcium at right around 415 to 430, magnesium right around 1400, pH right around 8, alkalinity in the 8 to 9 range.
Okay. And then let's talk about compatibility of clams a little bit here.
Clams, so actually this kind of brings us full circle to the reason clams started to be farmed in the first place. They were not farmed for the aquarium industry in the first place. They were farmed because they're tasty.
Yeah.
Lots of your fish will also consider them tasty.
Yeah, I actually, a couple of weeks ago, had someone ask me, will this clam do well in my tank? And I said, aren't you feeding your angelfish clams on the half shell?
Yes.
And he goes, oh,
Right.
yeah.
These are kind of just a bigger, even more tempting, more expensive version of that.
So I don't know that I could recommend a single butterfly fish for an aquarium with clams in them. Some of the pygmy and dwarf angels are okay.
Mhm.
Some of them are not. I do know a tank that has some of the most incredible clams in the area in it, and they have Atlantic pygmy angels, and it's a fine combination. Triggers are out.
Most of the big
Most of the
angels,
big
anyways.
angels are
Some of the really large wrasses, I'd be very, very skeptical working with on there.
Yeah. There's a list. If it eats coral, it's out. And if it eats clams, it's out, I guess.
Yeah.
If they go after big, thick, meaty foods, it's definitely a risk.
Yep.
The good news is your clam won't fight with any of your other organisms.
Very true. In fact, it's pretty amazing to see some of the videos of some of the giant clams, and they have entire acropora colonies growing on the shell of the clam.
Oh, it's so cool.
I once saw a video of they had orchid dottybacks that were living inside the Jurassic.
Yeah, they can do that. Another important, strange thing to think about with a clam is they have what's called an in-current siphon and an ex-current siphon. Basically an in and an out,
Yep.
right? When you're looking at orientating a clam in your aquarium with the current, and they do want flow, you have to make sure that the in is upstream from the out.
Whoa!
And the literal way to say it is, you want to make sure your clam cannot poop in its own mouth.
Fair.
It's a strange thing when you see a clam that all of those things seem to be right, but you look at that clam and it's just closed up. It's starting to recede. It's just not doing well. The excurrent siphon, you just see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's a sign of stress. Take that little clam, flip it 180, see what happens.
They can actually move and
Mhm.
jump around a little bit on their own. It's kind of crazy.
I had one squirt me in the face.
You can do that too.
But
Yeah.
they don't know which direction they're supposed to be facing. If they're moving, they're just seeing what else they can find somewhere else.
Right.
One last thing I really wanted to talk about, just because the clams we're getting here are pretty safe to work with in this respect. I've never
Mhm.
seen this, but that's not true for everyone who may see this video. So one of the biggest things to worry about with clams when it comes to parasites and disease is going to be parasitic snails.
Yes.
They're really easy to spot. If you pick up the clam and you look at the I'm suddenly blanking what the bottom part of the clam is called. But there's going to be the
You
spot.
can just call it the bottom part of the clam.
Yeah, yeah.
We're okay with that.
It's the part where the two shells meet, and they'll produce these like little threads that they can attach themselves to surfaces on, and these snails were often there. What's really nice is they're really easy to get off. You just pick them off with a toothbrush. But they will eventually kill a clam if you don't address that. So when you're looking at different types of clams, they actually come from different surfaces, and one of the first clues you can have is actually the depth that they're found in. So the deeper water clams are usually found in sandy substrates, like the Jurassic clams.
Right.
The squamosas tend to come from sandy but rocky, rubbly zones. So maybe you count that in your calculations. The maximas definitely like something rocky to attach to, whether it's on the sand, above the sand, or even slightly under the sand. They want something solid, not just sand. The croceas are a true rock dweller, and they're kind of weird because they'll produce a small, like, acid, and they'll slowly bore themselves into the clam. A well-established crocea, all you'll see of them is their mantle sticking out. That's really cool.
That would be a really cool look.
Yeah.
If you've got a successful reef tank with nothing that eats clams, there's probably a species you can try.
There probably is.
Particularly if you're keeping coral towards where you want to put the clam.
Yeah,
You know, that's a great way
stony
to judge
corals
it.
in particular.
Yeah.
If your tank is full of green star open canyon tree and they're doing great, that doesn't necessarily mean clams are going to do great.
Right.
If you're maintaining a healthy aquaport system, though, like
clam is gonna
guarantee
be
you
good
can
for you.
do clam.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say even probably most of the nice mixed reefs out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I do genuinely think clams are far more accessible than a lot of people anticipate them to be. I hope maybe this was a little demystifying. I think a lot of people look at them as foreign and they're like, there means there's no way I can keep it.
Yeah.
And I think most reefers out there, because most are doing a mixed reef, can pull off a clam in their system.
The one step you're going to have to take is a little bit of testing because those calcium levels are important for clams.
Yep.
Yeah.
For more information, this is James Feathery's book. This is the handbook for clams. What we just gave you is a really nice brief overview. Come on in and talk to us more about it, and we can help out more. But if you really want to get in depth with clams, this is the book right here.
That's, believe it or not, a lot of my information actually came from that
It's
book.
a fantastic book.
Send us pictures of your clams.
I'm always happy to talk clams.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so make sure to subscribe to see more videos like this. Let us know if there's anything that you want to see from us. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and keep in contact everywhere you can.
And in the meantime, let's have lots of fun and keep those hands wet.